Trucking companies have been quick to claim they're suffering a shortage of drivers. They've been saying that for a while now. But the truth is, their actual problem is less a problem of driver shortage and more of driver retention. Because hundreds of thousands of people become truck drivers every year, but hundreds of thousands also quit.
Yeah, that's why there's a shortage. People stop doing something, there's fewer people doing that. So how is that not a shortage? Geez, Oliver, this is stupid even for you.
And when a field this important has a level of job satisfaction that low, it sure seems like there is a huge problem.
A problem for which you should be blaming your holy government. But before we get going, I just want to let you know that this video was requested by Ali Adib on Patreon. If you'd like to request a video, just become a supporter on Patreon or Subscribestar at the $2 level.
So tonight, let's examine the trucking industry, how drivers make a living, how they often don't, and how companies benefit from the whole miserable system.
So yes, he's gonna blame greedy corporations for this as usual. I just want to remind you that last time we did this bozo, we saw that his crack team of researchers studied nuclear power for weeks and only learned what was in a single video made back in the 1970s. So that's the level they're operating on. Whereas just a few minutes online let me find data from the American Trucking Associations, which examined the various causes for the driver shortage. And their first point? Age. Truckers are just retiring, and there aren't enough new recruits to make up for them. We'll get into the rest as we go, but notice how Oliver never even mentions things like that.
And the first thing to know is, it wasn't always like this. In the 1970s, truck driving was a solid middle-class profession.
Yeah, sure it was. That's why there were all these trucker convoys and protests. That's why government-mandated paperwork got called swindle sheets. That's why truckers basically shut down the entire economy in 1973 to protest the nation's oil policy. That's why you had the National Guard responding to peaceful trucker protests with tear gas and forceful removal. That's why you had massive protests of unions and the rise of owner-operators who, spoiler alert, Oliver doesn't even mention. But it was the Owner-Operators Independent Drivers Association who generated a lot of positive results for truckers. I guess Oliver only likes unions when they aren't actually formed by the workers for their own benefit.
But the truth is, truck driving was genuinely a decent job. But that began to change in 1980 when Jimmy Carter signed the Motor Carrier Act, deregulating the market.
See? He took the biggest benefit for truckers and made out like it was a bad thing.
In an attempt to lower prices for consumers.
In reality, it was a loosening of Nixon's price controls. If anything, it didn't go far enough. But just relaxing price controls that much allowed the market to start booming again, resulting in much more jobs and much better pay for truck drivers. It eliminated rate making, got rid of most restrictions on the commodities the truckers could move, and greatly expanded the available routes and geographic regions they could serve. Truckers themselves gained much greater freedom to set their own rates, being able to change them by as much as 15% without begging mommy government for permission. It also greatly expanded contract rights for truckers, opening up the way for transport brokers who could help make better matches between truckers and those who demand their services. It was absolutely a boon for smaller carriers and startups, as well as owner-operators. The number of truckers doubled in 10 years. So how is this in any way responsible for a shortage?
That set off a race to the bottom in cutting wages among trucking companies. And 40 years later, the base compensation for long-haul truck drivers is estimated to be down 50%.
I found the Business Insider link he got this from. It was just one study they mentioned among several that ranged all over the place in their estimates. So yeah, cherry picking. But longtime subscribers will know the question I always tell you to ask whenever you hear a statistic like this. Since when? And in this case, since when means since the passage of the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. Yes, a time of abnormally high inflation and price controls. Do you really think that's the best baseline to use for figures like this? The fact is, in their bullet points, the ATA doesn't even mention low pay as a reason. One thing that is mentioned, the war on drugs. Truckers are made to pass ridiculous drug tests, even though half of states have legalized marijuana, meaning that if they use it for any reason, even medical, even if it's perfectly legal, even if it doesn't impair their driving in any way, they can get into hot water with the feds. Does Oliver mention that? Don't bet on it!
And there are three key problems with the way the industry is currently set up that we're going to look at tonight. The first is how they are paid, because most long-haul drivers are paid by the mile, not by the hour, raising obvious questions like, well, what about when trucks are waiting to load, unload and reload? Do they really not get paid for that? And for the most part, they don't. This is a huge sticking point for truck drivers.
It is, but if you actually listen to truckers, they're not complaining about not being paid for it. Another bullet point from the ATA is the amount of time truckers have to spend away from home, especially in the longer haul market. And the overly long times in loading and unloading, as we've covered over and over again, are due to stupid government regulations and union rules that result in truckers having to wait for hours, sometimes even for days, for their trucks to be loaded and unloaded. Notice that this isn't a problem in right-to-work states. And of all things, why would this be a problem of greedy corporations? Wouldn't corporations, wanting to maximize the bottom line, want to get things loaded and unloaded as quickly as possible? Notice that Oliver is deliberately avoiding placing the blame where it belongs.
The government has tried to address safety concerns by mandating brakes and limiting the number of hours truckers can be on the road. They even require electronic monitoring devices like this one that log when the truck is moving to ensure compliance.
And if you'd bother to actually listen to truckers, you'd know that this kind of thing is exactly what they're protesting. These things get in the way of them making money and increase the length of time they spend on runs, which you just said was a bad thing. Not to mention the hideous privacy violation.
So the consequences of my poor job performance are not likely to kill anyone.
Did you see how he just switched tracks? It went from all, ew, truckers aren't getting paid and things take too long for them, to, ew, they're threatening you. Shut your stupid lying face, Oliver. You do not care about truckers or the public.
So drivers end up getting squeezed between regulations and the companies that they drive for.
See? He's pretending like owner-operators don't even exist. By the way, according to the OOIDA, the median income of owner-operators is $50,000, and minorities are overrepresented. Might want to keep those stats in mind as you hear this guy whine out his virtue signaling.
Many carriers classify drivers not as employees, but as independent contractors.
Yeah, because they're owner-operators. But we know how much you leftist scum hate contractors, because being a contractor is a huge boon for the worker, but it doesn't allow your precious government to extort as much from them in taxes or use them as political fodder. Don't believe me? Just listen to him.
Because it also allows companies to avoid paying payroll taxes, workers' comp, and unemployment insurance, as well as the minimum wage.
See? Once again, Oliver, you do not care about truckers. You just want to take away what choices are left for them. Choices that they spent decades fighting for. You scumbag!
You know how you see FedEx ground trucks? Those aren't actually FedEx employees.
Right. They're independent owners. They work for themselves, which you hate, don't you?
Investigations by ProPublica and BuzzFeed found that in a 4-year window, drivers delivering Amazon packages have been involved in more than 60 crashes that led to serious injuries, including 13 deaths, or as that's more commonly known, a Bezos' dozen.
And what else do long-term subscribers know they should ask when they see a naked statistic like this? Compared to what? 60 crashes over how many miles driven? And how does that compare to normal drivers? How many of them were the fault of the truckers? Not only does Oliver not say, but notice that in his pull quote, it says the drivers had been involved in, not had caused, the crashes. And yet, he's making out like they're the ones to blame for all of them. If you had a problem with me calling him a scumbag earlier, I'm guessing you don't now. At least you shouldn't.
I've got one more exploitative quirk of this industry to show you, and it's something called lease purchase agreements.
Really, Oliver? How is this any worse than the exact same way drivers purchase their cars?
This is a system where drivers who cannot afford their own truck offer the chance to lease one from the company they drive for, with the promise that they'll earn enough to eventually pay it off and own it.
Well, hardly anyone is going to be able to afford their own truck right off the bat. So if you wanted to purchase it outright, you'd have to take out a loan, which you'd be on the hook for even if things didn't work out and you decided to do something else. A lease purchase agreement only obligates the seller to sell. The buyer, in this case the truck driver, can back out at any time. It's interesting the parts Oliver keeps neglecting to mention.
And the fact is, drivers who participate in lease-to-own agreements almost never succeed. One trucking company executive even estimated that of all the drivers entering into their lease purchase program, only around 5 to 10% actually ended up successfully taking ownership of the truck.
So what's the alternative then? The other 90 to 95% being stuck with loans they'd have to pay off? And remember, the whole point here is to explain why there's a shortage of drivers. How does making it easier to purchase a truck lead to a shortage? Going back to the ATA, some other factors actually leading to the shortage are a federally mandated minimum age of 21, state and federal limits on the number of truck stops and the number of truck parking spaces they can have, and more stringent requirements for expensive driver training schools. They also said, quote, "Because there is no single cause of the driver shortage, that means there is no single solution. Recently, driver pay and earnings have gone up significantly for a career that was already a well-paying path to the middle class for Americans without a college degree. Data from the Department of Labor shows that average annual earnings of production and non-supervisory employees, with the vast majority of those being driver occupations in the long-haul for-hire truckload industry, is increasing roughly 5 times the historical average. While this is good for drivers and those looking to enter this occupation, rising pay rates alone will not solve the driver shortage because some drivers will choose to work less at a higher pay rate, negating the impact of the increase." You'd never know any of that listening to John Oliver. Why do people watch him again? It's not the place you'd go for comedy because the guy's about as funny as a root canal. And it's certainly not for anything factual. He only exists as a cheerleader for the left's anti-worker, anti-consumer, anti-freedom, power-hungry propaganda machine. So thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, leave a comment, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.